Yes, thank you, Madam President. Earlier today, members of Congress had the distinct honor of hearing from Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of the State of Israel. He's a leader of one of our most steadfast allies in an unprecedented time of strife for his country. Prime Minister Netanyahu's message to Congress today was a snapshot into the reality that his nation is facing and what they have experienced since the morning of October the 7th. He spoke to the urgency of bringing our hostages home and received standing ovation for that. The courage and bravery of his Israeli forces and citizens and received a standing ovation for that. And his vision to bring peace, prosperity, and security to the Middle East. Again, standing room only. Israel is a country at war, and as the only democracy in the Middle East and a friend of freedom, Israel deserves the unwavering support of these United States. That is why it is incredibly disheartening to see many of our Democrat colleagues were absolutely absent from the address, especially the Vice President. Her absence unleashed a completely unnecessary discussion about who would join the Speaker to preside over the joint address. For a time, her seat behind the podium was just simply up for grabs, and I extend my thanks to my colleague from Maryland, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, for welcoming Prime Minister Netanyahu on behalf of the Senate, and that was Senator Ben Cardin. But unfortunately, the public debate over the Vice President's absence is not the message that we should be sending to the world. It seems some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have forgotten that 291 days ago, on October the 7th, 2023, Israel was the victim of an unprovoked terrorist attack. The attacking force, Hamas, killed 1,200 innocent Israelis, committed unspeakable acts of sexual violence, and took men and women and children as hostages. They also took Holocaust survivors. They even took an infant under 1 year old. And Prime Minister Netanyahu mentioned that infant earlier today. That poor child, that poor baby, has now spent more of his life in Hamas captivity than in freedom. To this day, nearly 10 months later, hostages still remain in captivity, including American citizens, and they're being used as human shields at the same time. I was incredibly moved to see some of the hostages and their families represented in the House chamber today. Hamas has proven itself to be a violent terrorist organization that continues to hide underneath schools and hospitals and intentionally putting civilians in harm's way. They have publicly called for the attacks of October the 7th to be repeated again and again and again. The bottom line is this: Hamas has made it clear it has no interest in seriously negotiating a ceasefire, and they would rather engage in barbaric and honestly cowardly acts of terror, joining forces with terrorist organizations like Hezbollah and the Houthis, who continue their bombardment in bombarding Israel in every single direction. Just last week, Hezbollah fired 65 rockets into Israel. The Houthis conducted a deadly drone attack on Israel's soil, and as well as a ballistic missile that was thankfully intercepted by Israel's air defense. It is clear that Israel needs our support now more than ever. It's important that we take this moment to reflect on the long-standing ties that bind our country to Israel. The United States was the very first country to recognize the State of Israel. They have been our most stable and longest partner and ally in the Middle East. They've stood beside us in our nation when we faced unprovoked acts of terror on our own soil. They have joined with us to develop ties with their neighbors through the Abraham Accords, and they've been an essential ally in our efforts to dismantle Iran's nuclear program. This is a level of historic partnership that cannot be forgotten. Yet far too many in our country are willing to abandon our relationship with Israel, starting with this administration. Israel is in a fight for their survival against a terrorist organization that is not bound by laws. We know what it's like to be attacked in our country, but we don't know what it's like to be geographically surrounded by our worst enemies. Standing with Israel should not be an issue that divides us, but rather one that unites us in defense of our longtime ally and friend. It is vital that the American public and my Democrat colleagues who missed the Prime Minister's speech today acknowledge the differences between Israel and Hamas. Israel is a bastion of freedom and democracy in the Middle East, who is engaged in a war they did not start by an organization whose only goal is to destroy Israel. In keeping with their stated goal, Hamas has unleashed horrific, illegal, and unthinkable acts of violence on people simply because they are Jewish or Israeli. Hamas and their allies have made commanding use of the information space to sway public opinion here in our country, in the United States, in an attempt to make it appear that Israel is the aggressor in this conflict. My Republican colleagues, including those joining me here in these speeches today, know that that claim is far from the truth. As the Prime Minister mentioned today, misinformation has long been used to target Israel and the Jewish people. And we have seen it lead to chaos on our college campuses and acts of aggression of anti-Semitism I never thought I would see. We have protesters waving Hamas, Houthi, and Hezbollah flags on streets right here in the United States, including today, surrounding the Capitol. At Union Station, they are burning the American flag. And after those protesters were publicly applauded, and will be the ones today, will be publicly applauded by the supreme leader of Iran, we now know that Iran is working behind the scenes to fan the flames of these protests. We need to be honest with ourselves about what each side of this conflict wants. The actions of Hamas are indefensible, and protesters conveniently forget that there was a ceasefire in place on the morning of October the 7th. I would say to these protesters, if the Iranian supreme leader thinks that you're on the right side of history, that's a pretty clear sign that you are not. The reality is this: both Israelis and Americans want the fighting to end. For that to happen, both sides of the conflict need to agree to stop. That means Israel, but it also means Hamas. And right now, we are missing that signal from Hamas. As the Prime Minister mentioned in his speech today, Hamas could end this right now. Hamas must surrender, and Hamas must return the hostages. Now more than ever, our nation must reject terrorism and stand with our ally, Israel. While the White House has left our relationship in limbo, Republicans will not let it falter. We'll continue to push for true American leadership on the world stage that keeps our promises to our friends in their time of need, that strikes fear in our adversaries and those who wish to do our allies harm, and that returns the moral clarity that is deeply needed in moments like this. With that, Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President, I rise today in support of America's great ally, Israel. Israel is more than an ally. She represents the hope in the Middle East, hope for the world. I actually visited Israel 2 weeks after October 7th. After that attack, visiting with a bipartisan delegation, not only to Israel, but throughout the Middle East. Remember that Israel was created after the Holocaust so that the Jewish people would never have to hide again. This is something that former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Ron Dermer, talked to us about during our visit. A colleague of mine shared that his daughter asked him right after 9/11, "Are we safe?" The truth is that October 7th was similar to our 9/11. However, there's also a large difference. On October 8th, Israel knew exactly who the perpetrator was. They knew exactly where they were. They were just miles away, their neighbor. It's like if we woke up on September 12th, 2001, and we had the terrorist who had masterminded the attacks of 9/11 living next door in Brooklyn. Additionally, they said they would come back again and again and again and again until they eradicated the Jewish people and the state of Israel. That's the proximity and the gravity of the threat that Israel faces. It's literally at their doorstep. And bottom line, they can't tell their daughters that they're safe right now. 291 days, over 9 months, have passed now. But we can't forget what happened on October 7th. Make no mistake, what Hamas did was pure evil. They murdered entire families, beheaded babies, dragged grandparents, some Holocaust survivors, from their wheelchairs to a brutal death. They raped women. They took mothers and daughters hostages after slaughtering their fathers and brothers. They held innocent people hostage and used them as human shields. As I think about this as a mom, I can't imagine the agony that parents are going through, knowing that their children, their loved ones, are being held hostage and used as human shields. I think about the moment when they talk about parents being murdered in front of their children, children being murdered in front of their parents. How could anyone be so evil? There is no doubt that never again is now, and not just overseas. Unfortunately, here at home. Look no further than the disgusting pro-Hamas, anti-Semitic protests that have taken place on college campuses, in cities across our nation, and today in our nation's capital. Today, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu came before Congress and asked us to do what we have promised, to stand behind Israel, to stand behind the Jewish people. America cannot be a country of broken promises. We cannot let our allies down. We cannot be viewed as a country that is weak and unreliable around the world. We must stand strongly with Israel and show her support, not just in normal times, but when she needs us the most. Israel has more than a right to defend herself. She has an obligation. She has an obligation to freedom-loving people around the world, as a beacon of democracy in the Middle East, and to the very people that she serves. Israel must ensure that this never happens again. America can and must help Israel fulfill that mission, help to bring every single hostage home, and help to bring about sustainable peace and more prosperity there in the Middle East. Remember, Hamas doesn't just want to destroy peace in the Middle East. They want to destroy Israel and wipe the Jewish people off the face of the planet. We also have to remember who funds and fuels Hamas. It is time to use every tool in our toolbox to dry up Iran financially. We've done it before under the Trump administration, and I know we can do it again. This isn't complicated. The more money that Iran has, they use it for nuclear proliferation, and they use it to fund terrorism. They fund Hamas in Gaza, they fund the Houthis in Yemen, and they fund Hezbollah in Lebanon. We know what that means for Israel, and frankly, we know what that means for America. It is past time to reestablish credibility in America and its deterrence. We will only achieve peace through strength. And that means giving Israel everything she needs to permanently end the threat of Hamas. As I listened to Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech today, I was in awe of the Israeli people's courage. The courage to fight for democracy. The courage to secure peace in the Middle East. And the courage to fight for their very existence. Congress is behind Israel. Alabama, the first state in America to call for the establishment of the Jewish state, stands behind Israel. And the United States of America is behind Israel. As a Christian, as an American, as an Alabamian, I firmly support Israel, and I'm incredibly proud to do so. Thank you. I yield the floor.
Senator from North Dakota.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise to join my colleague from Alabama and other colleagues and outline the importance of maintaining and continuing to strengthen our nation's support for our essential ally in the Middle East, Israel. The United States-Israel partnership is vital for Israel. It's vital for the United States. It's vital for security in the world. It is vital in this global fight against terror. Israel needs our help. It needs our help to fend off numerous attacks from Iran and its proxies. And I'm proud of the contributions our armed forces have made in helping defend Israel from a wide variety of drone and missile attacks. The skill of our committed airmen, airmen and women, soldiers, sailors, Marines, special forces, their skill, unbelievable. Their bravery, courage under fire, the technology that we have utilized, just incredible. And the things that they've been able to do in terms of helping Israel, and it's just beyond belief. And so we commend all of them, but we need to continue. We need to continue. We need to help Israel defeat Hamas. They need our help to completely destroy Hamas's military capability. And we can't relent until that's done. This is not a one-way partnership. This is not just the United States supporting our ally, Israel. Israel is really the tip of the spear. Israel plays a vital role in standing against terror and deterring Iranian aggression across the Middle East. When you look at Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, and other groups, these are terrorists that are financed, trained, sponsored, and directed by Iran. We need to recognize that. We need to take a tough stance on sanctions and other measures against Iran and recognize that these proxies for Iran are conducting its missives, its directions. We are deeply appreciative of Israel's efforts to push back on Iran, on the Houthis, on terrorists, and all those who seek to destabilize not only the Middle East region, but across the world. As we've heard Prime Minister Netanyahu say many times of these extremists, if they're not stopped in the Middle East, they will set their sights on America. And they will, and they have, and they will continue to do so. Our partnership with Israel is based on our shared values and our shared commitment to freedom. Without that partnership, terrorists, extremists, and authoritarians would run rampant across the Middle East and other parts of the world, threatening the global economy and positioning themselves to threaten the United States directly. And so the peace and stability we seek in the Middle East will come as the result of a strong U.S.-Israel partnership, and that is emblematic of the type of relationships that we must have with our allies. We must stand with our allies and stand up against our adversaries. And standing with our allies means not second-guessing them. For example, when Israel is conducting this war, they know how to defeat Hamas, and we need to help them do it, not second-guess how they are doing it. That is why it is so important that we heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu in person today. We needed to hear directly from him about exactly what is going on as Israel prosecutes this war and the support that they need to be successful in defeating Hamas. And now we need to move in a bipartisan fashion to continue to strengthen that relationship. There's really no time to lose. Iran's time to a nuclear breakout is down to a very short period. We need to stand together and prevent Iran from developing and potentially deploying a nuclear weapon. Hamas remains a dangerous terrorist organization. Hezbollah presents a growing threat in northern Israel. The Houthis, backed by Iran, pose a threat to Israel and the wider region, in the Red Sea and the Arabian Gulf, attacking shipping from many different countries. So it's essential that we make sure that Israel has the military assistance required to stand against these threats. Again, they are the tip of the spear. They are doing the fighting, and we need to help them. We need to offer all the support we can in every form, and we must oppose anti-Semitism in all its forms and wherever we find it. I want to express my appreciation for Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit and for his remarks to our joint session of Congress today. I thought it was an incredibly powerful and moving speech, and one that not only the senators and the members of Congress needed to hear, but all Americans needed to hear. And I hope that we can respond to the Prime Minister's visit by continuing to move in a bipartisan way to work with Israel to defeat the threats it faces and affirm our shared values, our shared commitment to freedom, liberty, and democracy. Standing with Israel is good for the United States. It is good for the region. It is good for the world. With that, Madam President, I thank you and I yield the floor.
Senator from Kansas.
Thank you, Madam President. This afternoon, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in his remarks to a joint session of Congress, reiterated to Congress, to us, the Senate, to the American people, and really to the world, his determination to defend his country from terrorists supported by Iran who seek the elimination of the Jewish state of Israel. The United States must continue to provide Israel with crucial military and diplomatic support to make certain the dangers Israel faces can be deterred and that, if possible, they are defeated those efforts to terrorize Israel. The horrific attack by Hamas 9 months ago remains vivid in our thoughts. A few weeks after that attack, I was in Israel to visit with the Prime Minister, to hear firsthand the circumstances that Israel and its citizens faced. In addition to those killed, the widespread instances of sexual assault and taking hostage of elderly and infants, under these circumstances, no person of conscience can fail to understand the desire to eliminate Hamas as a threat to the people of Israel. Our continued assistance to Israel is in our own national interest because the threats our friends face are also threats faced by the United States. This conflict may seem distant from our shores, but make no mistake that those who seek Israel's destruction aspire to harm American citizens wherever they may be, including here at home. 12 Americans were taken hostage by Hamas on October 7th, and 8 still remain held in captivity. Many hostages have died in captivity these last 9 months, making it imperative that Hamas immediately free our citizens. Hezbollah continues to menace Israel on the northern border, with fire being exchanged daily, forcing the evacuation of thousands of Israelis. With more than 100,000 rockets aimed at Israel, Hezbollah, like Hamas, is a direct threat to American citizens living there. It's true there, and it's true beyond Israel. The intelligence community's worldwide threat assessment released this year found that Hezbollah, quote, maintains the capability to target U.S. persons and interests in the region, worldwide, and to a lesser extent in the United States. That assessment warns that group will, quote, continue to develop its global terrorist capabilities. Our government, the United States of America, must commit alongside our allies and our partners to degrade Hezbollah's capabilities as a matter of international security. We saw as recently as last Friday's drone strike on a Tel Aviv apartment building, the Houthis in Yemen also pose a significant regional threat. Their slogan, of course, includes death to America, death to Israel. Their capabilities are expanding and have disrupted shipping through the Red Sea by launching attacks on cargo vessels. In response, the United States Navy has worked the last 8 months to reestablish freedom of navigation. All these attacks, these three groups, what they have in common is that with their varying ideologies is the support that's provided to them by Iran. It's financial aid, it's weapons, it's training. Iran sustains these groups at the expense of our friends in the region and at the expense of our own security and well-being. Almost exactly 1 year ago today, I stood on this Senate floor. I stood here in the Senate and called on President Biden to enforce the bipartisan sanctions Congress had passed to choke off the resources Tehran uses to fund its activities. The regime has plotted terrorist attacks on our soil and threatens to assassinate former President Trump, along with other officials from his administration. With its nuclear program now only weeks away from producing nuclear weapons, Iran is all the more imperative to take measures authorized by Congress. Israel's existence is non-negotiable, and our shared adversaries must not doubt the resolution of American support. That is one reason why I view it as critical to pass the National Security Supplemental earlier this year, which provided Israel with $26 billion to bolster its military. Standing with Israel goes beyond a one-off piece of legislation. And I would remind my colleagues that we have begun the appropriations process here in the United States Senate, and each year, and I will continue this year, to advocate for military assistance that strengthens Israel's ability to defend itself. As the committee begins to mark up 12 bills for the next fiscal year, I remind my colleagues it's important we quickly advance our appropriation legislation because of what is at stake for our nation and for our allies and for those who support our friends. Support for Israel goes beyond Israel's security. That's an important goal in and of itself. But I remind my colleagues that support for Israel is support for the United States of America. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Mississippi.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the following senators be permitted to speak for up to 5 minutes each prior to the scheduled roll call vote. Senators Wicker, Barrasso, and Ricketts.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Madam President. We stand here today having had the opportunity in a joint session of Congress to hear one of the most powerful and profound and significant addresses that has ever been made to a joint session of Congress. We have a few people listening in right now. I notice we have a number of our pages on the floor. Madam President, I'm glad that our young people, our rising seniors in high school who work for us, were able to be there and to be here in Washington in this Capitol and see and listen to this magnificent speech today by Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of the State of Israel. Our steadfast ally, the only democracy in that section of the world. And I will say, I doubt if we will very often see remarks that were as powerful and as important. Israel has been our steadfast ally for over 7 decades. It was a Democratic president, Harry Truman, post-war, that put his administration behind the recognition of the Jewish state in Palestine as Israel, and we became one of the earliest countries to recognize Israel. That has stood for over 7 decades. The recognition by the United States on a bipartisan basis has recognized an important fact, that the Jewish people are certainly not colonialists in the Holy Land. The place where Israel exists now is the place where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and Esau were born and lived in the era 5,000 years ago. To say that the Jewish people are colonialists in Israel is the big lie. The big lie is something that our enemies have used down through the years. You say something so unbelievable and so unimaginable that you say it long enough and people will start to believe it. The Jewish people are no colonialists in the Holy Land. The Holy Land is their ancestral home, and they deserve, the world's Jewish people deserve a Jewish state so they can avoid the centuries of discrimination and anti-Semitism that they have endured over time. The Jewish people, as I say, the Israeli people, which includes, of course, people that are not Jewish by heritage, have had the only democracy in the area for the longest time, and they've been surrounded by people who want nothing less than the destruction of Israel. And they don't make any bones about it. Support in this Congress, support in the United States for Israel, Madam President, has for these 7 decades always been bipartisan. And it breaks my heart, and I think it should come as a shock to all Americans, that bipartisan support seems to be fracturing on the other side of the aisle among my Democratic colleagues. It is a shame that the Vice President of this country, the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, declined to fulfill her duties to preside over the session. She found an excuse in another state to be at a meeting that could easily have been rescheduled. It's a shame that our Vice President, that the future nominee of her party for President of the United States, would make that statement that she was unwilling to preside over a joint meeting addressed by the Prime Minister of Israel. The President pro tempore of the United States Senate refused to attend. Many members of this body on the Democratic side of the aisle, many members of the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives boycotted this speech by our steadfast ally of 70 years or more. I noticed when the Prime Minister of Israel came down through the center aisle there in the House of Representatives, shaking hands on both sides, And he rounded the corner, Madam President, and the majority leader of this body, the senior senator from New York, Senator Schumer, declined to extend his hand to the Prime Minister of this, our steadfast ally. We also need to remember, as my colleagues have stated already, that in the region where Israel is the only democratic government in the Middle East, exists the Islamic Republic of Iran. They are a sworn enemy of Israel, and they're a sworn enemy of the United States of America. Death to America is what they say. And they want to start with death to America by pronouncing death to Israel. More than that, they have proxies, at least 3 proxies that we've been talking about recently. The Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah to the north of Israel, and Hamas, the terrorist group that perpetrated the October slaughter on the people near Gaza. Hamas has one reason to exist, one stated, admitted reason, and one reason only: the complete destruction of Israel. And they demonstrated their ruthlessness on October 7th. Rapes, beheadings, babies being burned, unspeakable acts of violence. And Prime Minister Netanyahu was correct to point out that people protesting outside this building on behalf of Hamas should be ashamed of themselves in protesting on behalf of a group that was so violent. Madam President, Hamas uses civilians as human shields. That is a violation of international law. By contrast, contrary to what people have been told in the press, Israel is doing the best job that any combatant has ever done in protecting civilians while trying to root out terrorist groups. I am calling on people on both sides of the aisle, in conclusion, to return to our bipartisan support of the right of a people to exist somewhere and to have one place on the face of the earth where they know they could be safe in their own beliefs, in their own population, and for the first time in centuries and millennia, to be safe and have their own homeland. So I congratulate the Prime Minister of Israel. I congratulate the members of Congress who received him well, and I invite my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to remember the importance of bipartisan support for Israel. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator from West Virginia.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the privileges of the floor be granted to the following interns in my office, Paul Bear and Harper Katz, during the pendency of this month of July.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, just delivered a historic speech to Congress. This is the 4th time the Prime Minister has spoken to the United States Congress, more than the late Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Winston Churchill. Like Prime Minister Churchill, Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke of a battle between freedom and evil. He shared with us welcome news, and that news is that freedom is winning. Israel's committed to bringing home the hostages, to protecting its citizens from the atrocities that occurred on October 7th attack. Meanwhile, the Hamas terrorist network is under more pressure than ever. Half of its senior leadership is dead. Its military chief has likely been eliminated. Remember, Hamas is a terrorist group. It governs through fear and through violence. Hamas violently rejects the right of Israel to exist and the right of the Jewish people to live in Israel. Hamas hides behind civilians. It uses them as human shields. Hamas stores its weapons, its military weapons designed to kill, in hospitals, in schools, and in homes. It has stolen billions of dollars of humanitarian aid to build its terrorist tunnel all around the area of the Gaza Strip. This is the same tunnel network where for 9 months and counting, 116 hostages, including 8 American hostages, being held by Hamas terrorists. I stand firmly with Israel as Israel fights to finish the war and defeat Hamas. Sadly, supporting Israel has grown more divisive in this country than I've ever seen it before. Today, Democrats are abandoning our greatest ally in the Middle East. They're calling to put conditions on aid to Israel. The Biden-Harris administration has delayed the delivery of war-winning weapons. The Senate Democrat leader meddled in Israel politics. He proclaimed in no uncertain terms on the floor of this very body that Prime Minister Netanyahu should step down. The senior senator from Vermont went even further. Last month, he declared that Prime Minister Netanyahu is a war criminal. Madam President, that accusation is disturbing, it's damaging, and it's dishonest. If it weren't bad enough, Vice President Harris skipped the Prime Minister's speech entirely. The Vice President typically presides over joint sessions of Congress. With her snub to Israel, Vice President Harris is leading the Democrats' Bibi boycott. Catering to the pro-Hamas wing of the Democrat Party is not serious leadership, not at all. The Vice President now wants to be Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America, yet she refuses to put politics aside and work with our indispensable ally. Her actions send a defeatist message to our enemies and a defeatist message to our allies alike. Madam President, this is a time when it is so critical for us to restore confidence in America. Here's what we need to do and how to do it. You do it through peace through strength, with strong, steady, and serious support for Israel and for Israel's right to exist. What is the approach of President Biden today? What is the approach of Vice President Harris? And what is the approach of the Senate Democrats, members of this body? Is it continued to appease our adversaries and at the same time abandon our friends? This is a dangerous world, Madam President. It is more dangerous under the failed policies of the Biden-Harris administration. America cannot continue down Democrats' path of war and weakness. Keeping America safe requires America and Israel working together. We heard that today in the joint session of Congress. Republicans believe in Israel's mission to defeat Hamas. We understand fully what is at stake, and our support is firm. Madam President, we must unite and bring back peace through strength. Now more than ever, the American people need to stand with Israel, and I'm one of those people that will continue to stand with Israel. Thank you, Madam President, and I yield the floor.
Senator from Nebraska.
I ask unanimous consent that the following interns in my office be granted floor privileges until July 26, 2024. Esme Vroom, Preston Kodak, Turner Vaughn, and Caitlin Hagstrom.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Israel is our strongest and closest ally in the Middle East. It is in our mutual interest to provide Israel the support they need to be able to destroy the terrorist group Hamas and secure the release of the remaining hostages. I am committed to doing that. My colleagues joining me today are committed to doing that. And yet the Biden-Harris administration has repeatedly appeased the radical pro-Hamas elements of their base. In fact, President Biden had to be pressured to put a meeting on the calendar with the Prime Minister. That should have been a no-brainer. Vice President Kamala Harris, whose only constitutional duty is to preside over the Senate, didn't even attend today's speech. She has one job, and I understand that being the presumptive nominee is new, but she does have a day job here. Instead, she chose a petty snub of our closest ally in the Middle East and a democratically elected leader. This is not how America should treat its allies. Sadly, this is one part of a larger pattern. The Biden-Harris administration has consistently undermined Israel's democratically elected government. After taking office, this administration gave $730 million to UNRWA, an organization that has been described as essentially being a branch of Hamas. President Trump had ended their U.S. taxpayer funding. President Biden and Vice President Harris brought it back. Their actions caused American taxpayer dollars to directly support Hamas terrorists in their attacks on our ally and our citizens. At least 12 UNRWA employees, funded in part by Biden and Harris, directly participated in the barbaric terror attack on October 7th. Over 100 UNRWA employees have ties to Hamas or other Islamic Jihad entities. Over 1,200 Israelis were killed, including nearly 24 American citizens. Many were taken hostages. 8 Americans are still being held hostage today, somewhere in Gaza, 291 days after October 7th. We need to stand with Israel until Israel completes its mission to free the hostages, bring justice to the terrorists, and restore peace. That's the best solution for the Israelis. That's the best solution for the Gazans. That's the best solution, period. The Biden-Harris administration has also pressured Israel towards a ceasefire with the same barbaric Hamas terrorists that want to kill Jews and have pledged to continue to perpetrate atrocities like October 7th. Meanwhile, Biden and Harris have repeatedly withheld or delayed critical shipments of weapons needed to destroy Hamas. They've attacked the legitimacy of Israel's democratically elected leader. So much for ironclad. Americans stand with Israel. My colleagues and I stand with Israel. We're proud to stand with Israel. The Biden-Harris administration should do the same. Thank you to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for his comments earlier today. They reminded us why it is so important that Israel is successful in destroying Hamas. They'll be doing the world and civilization a favor in doing so. Thank you to my colleagues for joining me today on the floor. And thank you, Madam President.